book of Nehemiah, if you look at the scriptures before the ones I'm going to read, we have Nehemiah, who was a cupbearer, who was responsible for the wine of the king to make sure that it wasn't poisoned. It was a great responsibility. And a lot of times these men became advisors to the king just because they were with them a lot. Nehemiah, of course, was a Jew, and he heard that even though the temple in Jerusalem, now this was during the captivity, at the end of the captivity, you should say, the temple had been rebuilt, but the walls of the city of Jerusalem had not been repaired, the gates had not been repaired. And so he had come to the king and asked him if he could go back and do this, and the king allowed that. Now I'm going to pick up with Nehemiah chapter 2 and beginning with verse 11. So I came to Jerusalem and was there 3 days, and I arose in the night, and some few men with me. Neither told I any man what my God had put in my heart to do at Jerusalem, neither was there any beast with me, save the beast that I rode upon. And I went out by night by the gate of the valley, even before the dragon well, into the dung port, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem, which were broken down, and the gates thereof were consumed with fire. Then I went on to the gate of the fountain, and to the king's pool, but there was no place for the beast that was under me to pass. Then went I up in the night by the brook, and viewed the wall, and turned back, and entered by the gate of the valley, and so returned. The rulers knew not whither I went, or what I did, neither had I as yet told it to the Jews, nor to the priests, nor to the nobles, nor to the rulers, nor to the rest that did the work. Then said I unto them, You see the distress that we are in, how Jerusalem lieth waste, and the gates thereof are burned with fire. Come and let us build up the wall of Jerusalem, and we be no more of a reproach. Then I told them of the hand of my God, which was good upon me, as also the king's word that he had spoken unto me. And they said, Let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for this good work. But when Sanballat the Horonite, and Tobiah the servant, the Ammonite, and Geshem the Arabian heard it, they laughed us to scorn, and despised us, and have said, What is this thing that ye do? Will you rebel against the king? Then answered I them, and said unto them, The God of heaven, he will prosper us, therefore we his servants will arise and build. But ye have no portion, nor right, nor memorial in Jerusalem. Nehemiah was allowed to go to the city of Jerusalem. Upon request, he had been was permitted to rebuild the walls. And of course, he arrived there with probably a great group of people for that far in traveling. Jerusalem was about 139 acres in size. You know, we think of a great big huge city, but in Nehemiah's day, that would have been a good sized city, but you know, compared to today, that would just be very small. I looked up, I was kind of curious as to how big these walls were, because most of these cities had these big huge walls. And from what I gather, it averaged on about 39 feet high, and it was 8 feet thick, so you can imagine what a huge undertaking. Now, the walls weren't totally destroyed, but they were broken down in many places. They burned the gates, so there was no gates to protect the city. And that was very important in those days. People in the outlying areas, when there was trouble or if there was an invasion or in time of war, they would come to the cities and they would close the gates and they were protected behind the walls. And the armies that besieged the city would have to break the walls down or climb over them or break the gates down or some way to get in order to defeat the enemy. Now, when we considered over there in the book of Ezra, the group of people that came back rebuilt the temple. But then in Ezra, we see how that the work began to be neglected. And of course, the city was still unprotected. There were no gates, no walls, no nothing. When we think about the size of these walls, and then we read over there, I think it's in chapter 4, of the people that actually worked on the walls, most of them were unskilled as far as building walls. Now, a lot of times when we think about things in the church or in spiritual matters, we think, well, I can't do that. I've never done anything like that, or I'm nobody, and so we want to kind of pawn it off on somebody else. But I want to look at that today, but I also want to look at, I intended this message last week, and of course the bad weather and the nasty roads and stuff, we had to cancel our service. I kind of wanted to preach on this as a year-end message and look at it maybe in a little bit different light. So as we look at some of these scriptures, I want to try to look at some other things maybe in a way we don't normally look at. But now, if you notice there in verse 13, now Nehemiah, these scriptures that I read, he's out there, he went out at night, he didn't tell anybody other than the few men that went with him what he was up to, and he began to examine the damage that was done to the walls and the undertaking that it was going to be. And there in verse 13, and I went out by night by the gate of the valley, even before the dragon well, into the dung port, and viewed the walls of Jerusalem. Notice this, which were broken down, and the gates thereof were consumed with fire. This little night tour, so to speak, would give him an idea of exactly what lay ahead. And as he began to go around Jerusalem and to see the damage, and in one place there, I believe it said that there was just so much rubble that he couldn't, whether he was riding a donkey or a horse or whatever, he said he couldn't pass because of the rubble. He had to see what damage and what had to be done. He had to have an idea of what it was going to take to rebuild. Now, we need to do that ourselves. We have to examine ourselves. We have to look at our lives and see just where we need some repair. Now, I don't care how good a Christian you are. You take a brand new house, you'll probably find something that needs fixing. You know, we watch these programs where they're building a house or remodeling a house, and then the people move in and they show them a month or 2 months later, and they tell you how they like it, and it's like, well, we didn't like this, so we built some shelves here, or we put something over here to give us a little more room, or we took this out to make more room. You see, brand new, or it was completely renovated, but it just wasn't practical, so they do little things. And I guarantee you, you can find a lot of things to do at my house. And I'm sure there's a lot of things you can do at your house. Don't care how new it is, how old it is, or how recently it was worked on. There's always something to fix. In our lives, there's always something to fix because we're all sinners. And if you're a child of God, you're a sinner, saved by the grace of God. In Psalm 139, verse 23 and 24, he said, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." Do you really want God to search you? Think about that. I can look at myself and I'll overlook things. Have you ever took something and put it in the house just to see how long it would take somebody to notice it? An ugly picture and hang it on a wall somewhere, and you're so used to everything being where it's at, you come in, you never notice it. Or you get so used, kind of like women, they get men in trouble because, you get used to seeing one another, and then they come in, you notice anything different? You're in trouble. Because it probably ain't something really, really noticeable. And so you're sitting there and you're looking at their hair, and you're looking at their nails, and you're like, and you're trying to figure out, now what is it? Because if I don't answer right, I'm going to get in trouble. You see, we don't notice things ourselves. Kind of like somebody that gets out and whether they're working or they just ain't took a bath. You know, most people that stink don't really know they stink unless they really, really, really stink. But everybody around them notices the stink. Now, that's why we need to ask God to search our heart, because He knows every little nuance of our life. He knows our faults. He knows our failures. He knows the areas we're strong in. He knows the areas that we're weak in. He knows our walls. He knows how we are. He knows where we're broken down. He knows where there needs to be a little bit more mortar in the joint. So we should ask Him, because I might look at myself and I don't see nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of things in our life that we do that we really don't think if it's wrong or not. In Job 31:6, he said, "Let me be weighed in an even balance, that God may know mine integrity." Do you want God to weigh you? You remember there when they were having their drunken party over there in the book of Daniel, and the king saw a hand that wrote on the plaster of the wall, and he was scared, and they called Daniel to interpret it. And what did he tell him? "You've been weighed in the balances and found wanting." Job said, "Let me be weighed in an even balance." Would you want God to put you on a moral scale and weigh you? I'd be afraid to, for myself. What's really interesting is when you look back in Nehemiah chapter 1, and he had heard about the city of Jerusalem lying waste and the walls destroyed, he began to pray. And we see him continually praying. Before he ever made the journey, he prayed. Before he ever went before the king, he prayed. We see, I believe I read, there was 12 prayers in the book of Nehemiah, and 9 of them were his prayers. So, he prepared himself first before he had the first board, before he had anything to repair the breaches, to build the gates. What did he do? He prayed. Many times when we're faced with something, we want to start gathering up material, spiritual material, when first thing we ought to do is pray about it. When there's a task before us, we need to pray about it. You can't get ready for the work until you prepare for the work. You know, if you're going to be outside on a real cold day, you better be prepared for it. You better have on some warm shoes or boots. You better have on some gloves and something over your ears. Better have something over your head if you're bald-headed like I am. You have to be prepared. How many times have you had nice clothes and you get out and somebody be doing something and you want to help, but I don't want to mess up my clothes. So you either mess them up or you don't help. The point is, we have to prepare, and we begin to prepare by praying. In James chapter 1, in the first part of verse 6, he said, "But let him ask in faith, nothing waver." It amazes me. You can go online and sometimes you'll see, well, here's 5 prayers that you can pray about this, or 5 or 10 prayers you can pray about that. There's so many great prayers. And you know what? To me, those are just words. Prayer without holiness is just totally ineffective. It's worthless. I get up in the morning. Usually I'll sit down and read my Bible and spend a few moments in prayer. Couldn't tell you the times that I'm sitting here thinking about something I got to do at work, or I'm sitting here thinking about something I got to do after I get home, or I'm sitting there thinking about something that's going on, or a problem I have. And then I'm like, I don't even remember what I was supposed to be talking to the Lord. Don't you hate it when you're talking to somebody and they're sitting there and they're playing with their phone, or they're sitting there? I know a lot of times Teresa, if she's home there, she might be watching something on TV and I'll be talking to her and she'll just sit there and I'm like, hello? And I'll look at my dog and go, I'm invisible. What? Never mind now. When you're trying to talk to somebody and they're not listening, prayer is more than me just talking. It's listening to God talking back. Now, I like to talk, and sometimes I want to hear what I got to say, but I might not necessarily want to hear what God's got to say unless He's like, oh, I'm just going to bless you all over today. I don't like it when it's like, you're going to have the worst day you've had this year. You're going to have this day, I don't care if it's Friday, this is going to be Monday all day long. I don't want to hear him tell me that. And usually he don't. I find that out eventually myself. But the point is, prayer is a conversation between you and God. We better pay attention to what He's got to say. Just like Nehemiah, when he prayed, he opened his heart to God's Word. He opened his heart to God's voice. And when an opportunity arose, he took it. And God led him to Jerusalem. Now, he was probably weeks, if not months, away in travel time. He had to take and organize and get men. He had to have materials picked up at the king's forest. He had to have permission. So it took him a while. Be like, boy, this is a great idea. God, lay it on somebody's heart to do. But he jumped at the chance himself. Even though he may not have been qualified, but you know what? God qualified him himself. You know, when we look back, you say, well, I don't get where you're going with the end of the year message. Well, 2020 is probably, I heard somebody say there just yesterday, and I can't remember exactly how they put it, but it's one we'll never forget. 2021 might be worse. Every year at the beginning of the year, you kind of, in your mind, whether you say it or not, man, I hope this is a good year. Who would have dreamed this time last year that 2020 would have turned out like it was? Been crazy. And every single person, probably pretty much on the face of the earth, has been affected by it. Have you ever seen so many people afraid? I don't even remember where it was at. It might have been at the dump when I was throwing trash out. There's a woman in a car over here, all by herself. I didn't see nobody with her. And I believe she was putting her trash in the dumpster with a mask on. And I'm like, you're by yourself. I'm way over here on this side of the place there where the dumpsters are. You see people driving down the road by themselves with a mask on. Why are they doing that? Because they're scared to death. There's people that ain't been hardly out of the house for nearly a year. Why? Because they're scared to death. What about church? Churches have struggled. We have struggled. Because people are not coming. People with health issues. You know, I've said all along, and even in the beginning, there a while ago, we only missed one service all year, and that was last year. Or last week, rather. Which was technically last year, I guess. But And that was because of weather. Usually we miss several because of weather in the wintertime. But we were fortunate. So 2020 has been a horrible year, but it's been good in the fact that we only missed one service all year long. Might not have been many here a few times. Well, a lot of times. Canceled our Easter service, canceled all of our other services, the special services, homecoming. Think about that. It's been a horrible year for churches. But what really gets me is not the ones that's sick, it's not the elderly that are not coming, it's the ones that go to work every day. So you're going to get some people mad at you that go to work every day. You see them at Walmart, you see them on Facebook, being here, being there, but they can't come to church because of COVID. To me, that is wrong. If I go to work every day, and that's why I always said I felt like I had to be here whether anybody else was or not, because I go to work every day. I'm around more people at work than I am at church. But the point is give a lot of people an excuse. A lot of people have become complacent. They become self-centered. Quite frankly, they're a lot, even some that have come. We've got lazy. We should be working even more. The church should be out doing the church's business. But we want to be safe. I'm not saying go into a house with no mask, no nothing, and it's got the virus there, and I'm not saying that. But I'm saying, when you look at history, and I think I preached on this back when all this first started, we saw the church going out into these cities where the bubonic plague was raging, where all these other, the cholera and all these other things were just, people were dying by the hundreds. And they turned their houses into hospitals and they took care of the sick. Now we want to take care of everybody from Facebook. We want to send memes that uplift. We want to say, oh, I love God. I just can't go to church. But I'm going to work tomorrow. And to me, that's wrong. Now, if you're all right with it, that's between you and God. A lot of us have used the events of this year, and not just COVID. This has been a crazy, crazy year, as an excuse instead of a reason. And to top it all off, just a few weeks ago, right before Christmas, everybody would run outside at dusk to see the conjunction of, Jupiter and Saturn. They called it the Star of Bethlehem. And they would run out and take pictures. Which there's nothing wrong with that. I went out and looked a couple of nights. It was cold, and I went out there and I looked. Went back in the house. I personally don't believe that was the Star of Bethlehem that the wise men used years ago. Whether you believe it or not, it's really not important to me. They saw whatever they saw, whatever star or whatever sign it was, and they followed it, and it came to Jesus. That's all that matters. But the point is, they're looking for the Star of Bethlehem, or was looking for the Star of Bethlehem. They should have been looking for Jesus Christ. The wise men didn't go looking for a star. They went looking for the Christ child. We look for everything. There's been books upon books written about by people trying to figure out who the Antichrist is going to be. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's like I heard Preacher on the radio, Greg Laurie. He said we ought to be more interested in knowing who Jesus Christ is than who the Antichrist is. I'd rather know Jesus than to see 2 or 3 planets. I'd rather see Jesus. I would rather know Jesus than for somebody to come up and find a cure for this virus, find a cure for cancer, find a cure for whatever ails you. Knowing Jesus is a lot more important than that. Because if this virus kills me, or if I start home in a car wreck, or whatever kills me, or I get sick, or I have cancer, or I have whatever it is, if I know Jesus, then the rest of all this ain't going to matter. Proverbs 25:28, he that hath no rule over his own spirit is like a city that is broken down and without walls. If we can't control ourselves, we're like a city with broken down walls, like Jerusalem was, with broken down walls, burned gates, rubble and destruction everywhere. And they had to rebuild all that. Walls nearly 40 feet, 8 feet at least thick. And if you look, there in chapter 3, the work was assigned and began to be built. The walls began to be repaired and rebuilt in places. You see the priests, you see Levites, you see some of the rulers. I believe one man there, it said him and his daughters. They assigned certain sections of the wall for certain groups of people, and they built those. I believe at least one of them, it shows where he built more than one section. Most of us, we'd get our section done, and if everybody else was still working, well, I got mine done, I'm going to go get me a drink of water and sit under the shade. But apparently, this one, when he finished his, well, there's still plenty to do. You know, when we were cutting tobacco, I hated that job. I hated tobacco. I hated everything about tobacco. We'd be cutting tobacco, and me and Jeff, we didn't, most time on weekends and on a Saturday when we were off from school or when we wasn't working, we'd help Dad. Dad, he'd spent his life farming. I'd be out there and cutting tobacco and look back and see how far I'd come, and then I'd start looking for Jeff, and if he was over about even with me, or I really liked it if he was a little behind me, because then I'm ahead of him. But then I'd start looking for Dad, and you might as well not look behind you, because he would be way out yonder somewhere. And let me tell you, Dad, when he cut tobacco, he didn't do like a lot of them do. They'd cut it, turn some of the stalks that way and some of them that way, and just prop them up. He drove his sticks in the ground. And when you hauled them, you could tell every row he had, because when you went to yank them things out of the ground, you had to just about work them like that to get them out, because he didn't want them falling over. And if we helped him, you better do the same thing. But I'd look out and he'd be way up there in front of me. And you know what he did when he got to the end? He'd turn around and he'd start backing one of ours. And I just had my fingers crossed. I'll let it be mine. I hated it when he turned around and started backing. I looked and he was coming up Jeff's row. And I thought, oh man, it's going to be that much longer before I get mine done. Of course, when they finish theirs, they just fall over into whoever was last and finish them up. But the point is, when he got done with his row, he fell into work somewhere else. We read chapter 3 there, and all the different people didn't have any experience necessarily, but they rebuilt the wall. Nehemiah 4:6, he said, so built we the wall, and all the wall was joined together into the half thereof. For the people, notice this, had a mind to work. I had a cousin lived up, and by the way, they finished repairing the walls in 52 days. Think about that. A wall that went around 100 and what did I say, 39, 40 acres? Now, not all of it was broke down, but they repaired it and rebuilt the broken sections in 52 days, less than 2 months. That's some work. I had a cousin lived up in Ohio, and he would come down sometimes to spend the summer. And he's a city boy. Hadn't never done no farm work. But me and Jeff be sitting there arguing over whose turn it was to go feed the calves or whose turn it was to do something. You'd turn around and Steve would have a bucket and be going to the barn to get the feed, to go feed the calves. He loved it. He'd do anything. Work in the garden, work in the field. He didn't care. He'd just do it. And it really irritated me because I didn't want to do it and I didn't want somebody else making us look bad. But he didn't care because there was a work to do and he went and done it. Even though he'd never farmed before, he'd go and do it. If there's a work to do, you know, this church, now we're just a little old country church, but there's a work to do. Well, I don't know what to do. Well, first of all, we need to pray. Second of all, there's a work to do and we need a mind to work. I get up in the morning a lot of times and it's like, man, I don't want to go to work. I went to work Tuesday or Wednesday and I'm like, I said, I ain't using every one of my vacation days that I've had since the end of July. I'm going to be off Friday anyway. So I'm going to put in for tomorrow. I'm just going to take me a day off. No reason. Didn't do a thing hardly, piddled around the house. But I just didn't want to work. Didn't want to go to work. So I took a day off. We need a mind to work. And let me tell you, if we have a mind to work and we've prayed about having a mind to work, then God will give an opportunity for you to work. And you know what's going to happen? We look over there in chapter 4. And let me just read verse 15. And it came to pass when our enemies heard that it was known unto us, and God had brought their counsel to naught, that we returned all of us to the wall, every one unto his work. And it came to pass from that time forth that half of my servants wrought in the work, and the other half of them held both the spears, and the shields, and the bows, and the habergeons, and the rulers were behind all the house of Judah. They which builded on the wall, and they that bare burdens with those that laded, every one with one hand, one of his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand held a weapon. For the builders, every one had his sword girded by his side, and so builded. And he that sounded the trumpet was with me. When you go to work for God, you're going to be attacked. You're going to be made fun of. You're going to be, as we read there in chapter 2, we're going to be laughed to scorn. But the point is, they continued to work. And if we have on the armor of God, and we better have it all on, and have our sword at our side, and we continue to work, God will prosper. These worked, he had some of them holding weapons while the other half worked. Imagine if they could have all worked at the same time. Some of them were working, if they had weapons, they worked with weapons at their side, so that if they were under attack, because they still had no gates, if they were attacked, and they probably didn't have a lot of people, so they were very vulnerable. If we decide to work, we're going to be attacked. I'll never forget when all this virus stuff started this year, and I was debating on whether to cancel church or not. I think it was on a Saturday, I decided, well, I'm going to be there whether anybody else is or not. And I put it on Facebook. The church will be open, I'll be down there. If nobody comes, I'll do the video or whatever and put it on later. I hadn't more than put that on there. A woman put on there, well, ain't you heard that Lee County had their first 2 cases that day? Aren't you afraid? It made me second guess. And I thought, am I doing the right thing or the wrong? I really debated on that. But I decided I'm going to be there. I go to work. You know, if I go to work, I ought to be at church. And if I'm the only one there, then so be it. You know what? I've not been down here by myself. But one time, and that was on Good Friday, and I came down here and done that Good Friday video. Nobody else knew about it. But we've always had at least 3 here, I think. And you don't know how much I appreciate that for those that's come this year. And I understand again, those that have health problems, those that are sick, those that are elderly. I understand that. But if you're out here running around, kind of like Jim Whitaker, I seen he said there, if you can get out and run around, then you ought to be at church. That's just how I feel. If you don't like it, I'm sorry. You don't have to answer to me. You're going to have to stand before God someday. Nehemiah examined the wall and seen what work needed to be done. Then he approached the people and he told them what he was there for, that they were going to rebuild those walls and fix them and repair them. And they said, let's do the work. And they began to work, and they began to be attacked and ridiculed and mocked. Churches have been ridiculed and mocked all this year because they have services. Then it was, oh, you can have services but don't sing. That spreads the little droplets all over the air. I know people that have gotten sick, and they said they got the virus from church. I guess it really don't make no difference, but wouldn't it be better if you got sick at church, caught it from being at church than being at Walmart? I mean, either way, you're going to be sick. I'm not suggesting that you just go and throw caution to the wind. But that's like I've told everybody. If you want to come, we got plenty of room to spread out. You can sit to yourself. Nobody will bother you. And if they do, just be like, get back. I hope 2021 is much better, but I really honestly don't expect it to be. But whether it's better or not, that don't give us an excuse to sit down. There is a work to do. We need to do it. And when we do it, we will be attacked. We will be made fun of, just like any other church that sits down to do the work of God. Where do you stand today? Well, I don't know what to do. Begin like Nehemiah. Pray. Our Father, we just ask for direction and understanding in your word. We ask for your guidance, Lord, and help us this year to set our eyes on the things that are ahead. We can't dwell on the things that are behind. Lord, let us look to you and to seek your will, to listen to your voice, and to honor you. Lord, let us always glorify your name. And God, we just pray that we would do our best to be lights in a dark world, that you would save the lost. Lord, that you would touch those that are complacent. Lord, that are full of fear. Lord, that are sorrowful in heart. Lord, we just pray that you would move in each and every life. In Jesus' sweet name.